Hello and welcome to Hot Issues. We are continuing our discussion on the release of 2 Guantanamo-based detainees to Ghana. We'll be looking at the legal implications of this move that our government has made on our behalf. And we will look at other implications also. Welcome to Hot Issues. Hello, welcome back to Hot Issues. And as I indicated from the very beginning, we are taking a look at an issue which has become exceedingly hot. The decision of the government of Ghana to accept 2 ex-detainees from the Guantanamo Naval Base of the United States of America. And we are looking at the legal implications of this action that our government has taken on our behalf. We will look, if there's time, at other implications also. Has our president and indeed government acted in accordance with international law and the provisions of our constitution? This is the issue before us, and we are once again privileged to have with us in the studio for this conversation lawyer Kwame Gyan, an expert in public and international law, a member of the Faculty of Law at the University of Ghana. He teaches law also at LASIA, the Foreign Policy Institute at Legon, and has been teaching law at the Ghana Armed Forces College. So you're welcome to the studio.
Thank you. How have you been?
Fine, sir.
Happy New Year.
And many, many happy returns to you, sir. Now, sir, let's start with a bit of history. Background. How did Guantanamo, which is a Cuban territory, become a U.S. naval base? How?
Kwesi, Guantanamo is a very interesting situation. You know, in international law, there are different ways by which states get to control or own territory. One mode of territorial acquisition is discovery and occupation of what we call in international law terra nullius, which is land which has not been occupied before. So you remember many years ago, we were told in our history classes that a gentleman called Don Diego de Azambuja discovered Ghana. You know, we found out that it is a fallacy because our people were already here. So how could he have discovered our territory? But that is one mode of acquisition of territory. Traditionally, another mode of acquisition of state territory was conquest. So you could have defeated a country in a battle and you take their land. But Guantanamo presents a very unique example of territorial acquisition. This is acquisition by what we described as lease in perpetuity. Now, in 1903, the then Cuban government entered into 2 separate agreements with the United States of America. And arising from this agreement, the island of Guantanamo was ceded by Cuba to the United States of America for a rent of $2,000 per annum, which is yearly, and in perpetuity. Because see, normally, when you enter into a lease, it has a date on which it starts, or a commencement date, and a date on which it ends, or an expiry date. But the Guantanamo Bay lease has only a commencement date, but it doesn't have an expiry date. And that is what the Cubans did to themselves. At the time of the entry into this leasehold agreement, Cuba and America were friends. Probably they were allies. But their situation changed as Castro came on board, who was not a friend or ally. And Castro sought to repudiate the agreement that had been done by its predecessor. But the Americans said, this one you can't repudiate without our consent, because that is the term of the leasehold, that it could only come to an end with the consent of the United States of America. And insofar as they've not given their consent, the lease is still running in perpetuity. Cuba has refused consistently to take the rent. But so far as the Americans are concerned, they have a lease which is still running.
Now, we are now in a world in which two-bedroom apartments, rent for two-bedroom apartments can be in excess of $3,000 per month. Is it justifiable for the U.S. to hold on to the whole Guantanamo Bay on the pretext that it has a lease agreement which enjoins it to pay $2,000 per year?
Yes, Kwasi. You see, in international law, when states enter into agreements, there's a principle in the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, Article 26 of the convention, to be specific. The principle is expressed in the Latin maxim as follows: Pacta sunt servanda. Pacta sunt servanda. It means that when states enter into agreements voluntarily, they are required by international law to fulfill their bargains in good faith.
In good faith.
In good faith. So if you go into an agreement as a state with your eyes wide open, you are going to be bound by the terms of the agreement. That is why the Cubans have been saying that Guantanamo Bay lease was entered into by the Cubans under duress. Now, still in international law under the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, if a state can prove that the agreement was entered into because the state or its representative were coerced into signing, the state can repudiate.
Now, sir.
And let me add one more point before we proceed. Regarding Guantanamo, the agreement was very specific on what purpose the USA could apply the territory. The purpose was that the Americans should use the territory as a naval base and as a coaling station. You know, this was when ships were using coal to provide energy. So a coaling station simply means that it's a bunkering place where you could store your fuels and service your ships and refill your ships with fuel and so on. So Guantanamo Bay, per the leasehold agreement, was not supposed to be a prison.
I was going to come to
the
that.
The use was specifically set out as a naval base and as a coaling station.
Now, how come that land which had been leased for a coaling station and a naval base became a detention center? Why? And why was the United States interested in turning a naval base into a detention center?
It came up primarily after the 9/11 incident. After 9/11, the USA decided that, and you would appreciate that the USA doesn't like it when wars are fought on its territory. So if you watch how they conducted themselves in the First World War and in the Second World War, the time that they got a major attack was the Pearl Harbor incident, where the Japanese invaded Pearl Harbor. Minus that, there's not been such an attack, an act of war on American soil. So the recent one we encountered was 9/11. And the decision had been made at the highest political levels of America that don't wait for the terrorists to come and attack America in America. Rather, take the war out there to their locations. So chase them out where they have to be chased out. Don't give them room to regroup and come and launch attacks against American interests in America. So the idea was to go after the terrorists outside of America, to go after them where they were hiding. So Al-Qaeda and their affiliates engaged the USA outside of American territory in Afghanistan and other places. That's how come certain elements which were fighting on the side of Al-Qaeda and other so-called terrorist groups had to be pacified. And you needed to find a location to pacify those people. And Guantanamo was the surest candidate. for the pacification?
Pacification is a rather strange word. I mean, you're talking of a place where they were tortured.
They were pacified. They were being immobilized, kind of.
Was that pacification? They were tortured, the waterboarding and so on.
Because
deprivation of sleep.
The way intelligence gathering had been approved for purposes of those people, particularly coming in the heels of 9/11, methods were being applied, yes, somehow, and it came up
against international law and international conventions.
It came up even in the U.S. Supreme Court. You remember the Guantanamo Bay folks, 200 of them or so got legal representation to issue a writ in the USA, and they ended up in the U.S. Supreme Court. The question was whether a U.S. court could entertain an action for habeas corpus brought by the Guantanamo Bay detainees. And the court said that yes, they could bring claims in U.S. courts. Mm-hmm. So there's been some hustle and tussle regarding these Guantanamo Bay people and their status and so on. So it's not been an easy thing. It wasn't therefore a surprise when Obama came and said he was going to try to disband.
Before we get there, this is territory which allegedly had been leased by a Cuban government in 1903 or thereabout. You understand? Mm-hmm. We still haven't answered the question of why the United States of America decided to keep its prisoners on Guantanamo Bay.
Kwasi, let me take you rather straight into the normal law on leases. A lease in a normal legal setting is a contract which grants to a lessee by a lessor an interest in land for a definite duration, subject to payment of rent, and grants the lessee or the holder of the lease exclusive possession for the duration of the period. Exclusive possession. So, because the Guantanamo Bay arrangement is a lease, for the duration of the lease, the lessee
that's from
has
from the point of view of the Americans.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Americans as lessees, with Cuba as the lessor, grants the Americans exclusive possession for the duration of the lease.
But still, they have a choice of keeping the decision on mainland America or sending them to this leased land. What influenced the decision to send the detainees to the leased land instead of keeping them on mainland America?
A couple of reasons may apply. First and foremost, the sheer resolve by the American people not to receive these people on American soil. You see, the USA is a typical federal system with certain powers exclusive to the states, certain powers exclusive to the federal government, and certain powers concurrent jurisdiction. The different states that form the union in some cases are very powerful. And it would have been unthinkable, given the level of disgust there was in America for 9/11 and its aftermath, for an American government to say that they are bringing in persons who may have been associated with 9/11 to American soil. That would have been number one. Number two, if you decided to bring those guys to the USA, you were going to have challenges with American law in respect of how much of restriction you can impose on them. I'll give you an example. When I was a law student in New York University School of Law, the US government sought to close down the Palestinian Observer Mission in the headquarters district. And the argument was that they were a terrorist group. A bunch of scholars from Harvard and Yale, they went to court as amicus curiae. And the argument was that the US government cannot close down the Palestinian Observer Mission because they were in the New York headquarters district pursuant to the UN headquarters agreement, which has been concluded between the USA and the UN, which allowed the UN to invite people and accord status to them to come and operate within the enclave called the headquarters district. The federal court told the US government that you cannot close down the Palestinian Observer Mission. So the American court somehow can frustrate the executive branch of government in these kinds of things. So if I was advising the president, I will not bring these Guantanamo detainees to the USA, because the American law would have been available to them and you couldn't have sustained the continued detention.
So one, the American government wanted to find a way of circumventing the reach of American law.
Exactly. That is exactly what was done. And that is why, if you look at the rhetoric after Obama took over, the Attorney General made a statement straight away that the way those people were being kept, even in Guantanamo, were not consistent with the values of America.
That's very mild.
Yes. I mean,
they were illegal.
No. Because illegal is relative, depending upon where you are sitting.
No, American law frowns on torture.
Yes.
As a means of extracting information.
Know, by
the law of evidence, you know
yes,
that.
Yes, by executive orders, President George Bush had given instructions by executive orders regarding means and methods of interrogation specific to those people.
Yeah, but George Bush doesn't make law on his own.
No, you see, pursuant to congressional approval under the War Powers Act, the President of the USA could make executive orders which have the effect of law.
Why then were the detainees not kept on American soil if it was not in violation of law?
No, I told you, the USA courts couldn't have sustained the detention.
Because they were unlawful.
Because they were going to, for example, subject the War Powers Act and the executive orders made pursuant to the War Powers Act to their constitutional challenge.
Exactly.
And those kinds of methods wouldn't have sustained or survived a constitutional challenge.
So they were unlawful?
I would say so.
Or potentially unlawful?
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, so you needed to find a face-saving opportunity to incarcerate these people and try to circumvent, as you use the word, American law in that regard. And you know, there's a certain principle in political talk that difficult circumstances sometimes require difficult decisions. You know, it's like when you are in a desperate situation, you seek recourse to desperate measures. In this case, I think that is what happened in Guantanamo.
In this case, unlawful methods.
Depending upon where you are sitting. Oh. Because you see, whatever prescription that was delivered by George Bush at the time had the sanction of the #1 law enforcement officer of the USA, which is the Attorney General.
Yeah.
You see, so it was the same Attorney General then under Obama, an Attorney General called Holder under Obama, who also gave an opinion that the methods which were being used were not appropriate.
Now, sir, we know the history, the circumstances under which these persons were detained there. Who were detained there? I'm talking about categorization. Which kinds of people ended up on Guantanamo Bay?
You see, a myriad of people ended up in Guantanamo Bay, but predominantly persons of Middle Eastern Arab extraction, predominantly. Most of them were irregulars who, for religious, ethnic, or other causes, decided to fight alongside their brethren in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in other areas where American interests were at stake. So these were the kinds of people who were taken to Guantanamo. And most of them were not American citizens. Most of them, if not all.
So there were persons who were fighting against American interests.
Exactly. Not on American soil. They were fighting against American interests, not on American soil, but outside of the territory of the USA. But they were perceived to be fighting against American interests, American national security interests.
So some of them could actually have been fighting U.S. occupation.
Yes, in Afghanistan.
In Iraq?
In Iraq, yes.
In which case they were nationalist fighters.
It depends. You know, there is a saying that goes that one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. Now, if you are from Yemen and you are fighting in Afghanistan, you probably are a mercenary. Because is that not the case?
Possibly.
You may be a hired gun. If you are in Yemen, fighting in Yemen, a national of Yemen fighting in Yemen, but you see, you remember these two guys who are supposed to have been brought here. I don't know whether they are here.
We haven't reached there yet.
Yes, they are supposed to be citizens of Yemen.
We haven't reached there yet at all.
You know, so the bunch of folks we are talking about primarily were not Americans, were predominantly persons of Middle Eastern extraction.
Now, it's a fact that a number of persons who were held on Guantanamo Bay have not been tried. And they were detained without trial or charge.
Yes, but it is also a fact that some of the people who were detained in Guantanamo were ordered to be released by American courts upon habeas corpus applications.
Yes. But the point I'm making is that some of them could not be tried for any crime.
Yes, and you see, I agree with you on that. And even for those who you think may be tried, under what law would they have been tried? What tribunal would have tried them? Because if they are war criminals, you probably would have to try them under international law. And trying them under international law probably could have implicated a trial by an international forum and not by a tribunal that has national jurisdiction. So that probably was one of the complications the Americans were encountering.
Now, officially, the Americans describe these persons, or some of them, as enemy combatants. What does that mean in law?
This phrase, enemy combatant, is alien to the Geneva Convention 3, relating to prisoners of war. So, enemy combatant appears to be a term that was coined by an American Attorney General in the Bush era. They were struggling as to how to characterize these folks in Guantanamo. Because, Kwesi, they will not fit in the meaning of Article 4 of the Geneva Convention number 3 relating to treatment of prisoners of war. They wouldn't fit. So you cannot describe them as prisoners of war. Because if they were prisoners of war, a completely different legal regime applied to them, which is laid out in the Geneva Convention 3. So the Americans, and I checked the Geneva Convention on my way here, it looks like those guys wouldn't qualify as prisoners of war. And in order not to be able to not have a means to characterize them, the Americans decided to describe them as enemy combatants. And
which is completely outside the purview of international law.
Exactly. Because this was a domestic American terminology.
Alien to international law.
Yes. Enemy combatant, the way they use the meaning, is not one prescribed by international law. Because according to them, enemy combatant is effective date after 9/11. And it relates to either an Al-Qaeda person or a Taliban who fought American interests or who assisted in fighting against America and so on. So it is very restrictive, applicable to Talibans and applicable to Al-Qaeda operatives. So, Kwesi, if I, for example, was picked up, I will not be an enemy combatant within the meaning of what the Americans are using the term. Because I may not have been associated with the Taliban, and I may not have been associated with Al-Qaeda. So it was limited to persons affiliated with the Taliban and Al-Qaeda who are engaged in military or paramilitary operations against American interests.
So we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, I'd like us now to zero in on the decision of the Obama administration to disperse these so-called enemy combatants around the world. Short break. Hello and welcome back to Hot Issues. And we are in conversation with lawyer Kwame Gyan, who specializes in public and international law, who is a member of the Faculty of Law of the University of Ghana, and who also teaches at the Foreign Policy Institute at Legon, Lesia, and has had and continues to have some relations with the training of armed forces personnel and so on. And we are talking about Guantanamo Bay and the two detainees that are believed currently to be in Ghana. Now, sir, how and why did the Obama administration decide to disperse these so-called enemy combatants around the world?
Thank you, Kwesi. See, the decision to sort of disband Guantanamo was one of the very first statements that was issued by President Obama when he assumed office.
Was it not a campaign promise?
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
And he issued a statement relatively immediately after assumption of office that a multi-agency task team should be put in place to ensure that Guantanamo is disbanded within 1 year. Unfortunately or fortunately, this promise couldn't be delivered within the year. But it appears that it is still the desire, if not the aspiration, of Obama, that by the time he leaves office, around somehow late in the year 2016, there will be no Guantanamo Bay. A couple of reasons for wanting to have Guantanamo Bay.
There will be no Guantanamo Bay detention center.
Exactly.
Not Guantanamo
no,
Bay
the Guantanamo Bay
base.
as an American-controlled territory would be there, but no more a Guantanamo Bay as a detention center, like you have rightly put it. It appears from what the American officials have been saying that Guantanamo and the use of the land as a detention center is a blot on American values, on American foreign policy, and it is something that you want to correct if you had the opportunity. Now, what remained was, how do you deliver on it? Do you just one day issue an executive order, disband Guantanamo as a detention center, and let everybody loose? I think that is the sticking point. So you want to explore a face-saving method. A face-saving method.
You want to clean the mess that America has created.
Exactly. And you wanted to get those people who can help you either with brooms or wheelbarrows or whatever tools they have to help America clean up its mess. Because, Kwesi, to be honest, Guantanamo detention is a serious matter. And I tell you, the US government from Bush through Obama sought to get judicial blessings in America, but the judges were not cooperating. I don't think that there is an upheaval in the USA for a close of the detention center. I don't think the public support, there is a mass uprising that close Guantanamo. I don't think so. But I think it is rather Obama's conviction that Guantanamo detention center must go, which is driving this process. It is not really an internal American uprising.
But there's global condemnation of Guantanamo Bay. Amnesty International, Africa Watch, Name any human rights organization in the world, they condemn it, you know, as unacceptable, highly unacceptable. The judicial system in America frowns on Guantanamo Bay. The progressive sections of American politics frown on Guantanamo Bay.
But you see, Kwesi, at the time Guantanamo emerged, there was widespread support at home because it appeared that that was going to be the way of dealing with threats to America. Subsequently, it was realized that the bunch of folks who were being kept in Guantanamo wouldn't remove threats to the USA. And I think that is why, or that is how come, some domestic political support started to galvanize, to couple the international support to get rid of the detention center. And you know, one of the areas in which America prides itself is its human rights record. You know, the Department of State has these annual human rights reports on every country except the USA. And this is probably one of the reasons why they didn't bring these guys on American soil. You know, but still, the blemish of Guantanamo detention is a blot on America. And I'm not surprised that they are trying to wipe it off, at least whilst Obama is still there.
You don't think that what America is doing is trying to hide its embarrassment?
They've been embarrassed previously, and they continue to be embarrassed by Guantanamo and its aftermath. But what is their battle now is, how do you quickly do it and run?
How do you hide that embarrassment?
As for hiding it, because I don't think they can hide it. It's going to be in the books forever and ever.
So why don't they keep these enemy combatants, so-called, on American soil? Why are they bringing them to Ghana and other countries?
I doubt if any state of the Union would accept them.
And why wouldn't Americans accept them? If Americans would not accept them, why should Ghanaians accept them?
Kwesi, we are like in a situation of a household. Let's assume two adjoining households, myself and yourself. You have a dog in your home, and it used to be a very wild dog. It kills people, tears people apart, and then you come and tell me, "Oh, lawyer, these days my dog, I've removed all his teeth, I've tamed it, the dog is fine, he's now a pet, proper pet. But I cannot keep it in my house, but you can have it." So that is where we are. The dog is tamed, but the owner says he can't keep it.
But that's not the situation with these two detainees.
The public opinion in the USA most likely would not, and in an election year, I don't think Obama would do it. Even though he's not seeking re-election, he won't do it with the Democratic candidate.
Now, so if the citizens of the United States of America, which created this problem in the first instance, would not accept these detainees, why should a Ghanaian in Savulugu or a Ghanaian in Denu or Elubu accept them?
Is the Ghanaian in Denu or Nankpanduri or my village Achimo Krufufu, is he interested?
Why not?
You think
Why
he's
not?
interested?
The Catholic Bishops' Conference, the Christian Council, political parties.
Isn't it probably an elite problem?
But are they not Ghanaian? They are Ghanaian.
So you see, you think all the time the elite and the ordinary, what the politicians describe as ordinary Ghanaians, their interests are coterminous.
I've heard people on the streets complaining that they would not accept them.
The people on the streets?
Yeah.
Hey, I've not heard of.
I've heard people on radio, ordinary people, say that you're bringing in Taliban people when we have elections. They're going to mess up our elections.
Oh, I see. That they think that the people are Talibans.
Yes.
And that they don't want them in.
Yes.
But the Americans also don't want them in. So where would they go?
Yeah, but the Americans created the problem. And if the Americans don't want them, why should we want them?
But because we are compassionate.
Americans are not compassionate.
No. But on their coin, it says, in God we trust. Yes. So, we are in a country that is holier than the Pope. Is that not what we have become? We are compassionate.
Okay, now
they are looking at their national security. We are looking at compassion.
Okay. Now we are looking at compassion. Now Ghana is holier than heaven,
the Pope.
Than the Pope, and so on. Have we followed the law? Have we followed what the Constitution says in accepting these detainees?
Because see, the Constitution doesn't say anything about accepting detainees. You know, the Constitution of 1992, it doesn't say anything about detainees.
The Constitution says something about foreign agreements.
Exactly. The Constitution, in about 4 provisions, talks about our international relations. Article 40 of the Constitution, within the Chapter 6 on Directive Principles of State Policy, lay out some of the guiding principles of our foreign policy. Article 40. Then Article 73 also talks about our international relations. It talks about the fact that the government of Ghana shall pursue our international relations in accordance with sound international law principles and our Constitution, pursuant to the protection of our national interests. And then Article 75 also says that the executive branch of government can cause to be negotiated and entered into treaties or agreements with other nations, and they shall be ratified by Parliament by way of a resolution or the enactment of legislation. This is the scheme that we have.
Agreed, sir. Have we followed all of these edicts in the Constitution with respect to this issue of bringing in the 2 detainees?
Now, remember, when Article 40 and 70 talk about the implementation of the foreign policy of the state, it makes reference to the government. When you talk about government, you have a government in the broad sense and a government in the narrow sense. A government in the broad sense includes you and I. All the institutions and the paraphernalia of the state through which the state exercises control over the territorial space and beyond. So that is the government in the broad sense. The government in the narrow sense also includes or means the executive branch of government. So, Kwesi, when the Constitution talks in Article 40 and 73 about the government's power to engage in our foreign relations, we are talking about the presidency. Now, go to Article 57 of the Constitution. You are told that there is a man in this country or a person called the president. He is commander-in-chief, he is head of state, he is head of government, and he takes precedence over all persons in this country. And that is not all. All executive authority of this country is vested in him. And he can exercise his executive authority solely by himself or through officers subordinate to him. And Article 58 continues to say that
subject
to the Constitution.
Subject not only to the Constitution, but laws properly passed.
Exactly. So the Constitution, the existing law, and the principles of international law, it's all there, yes. But the man is a very powerful man.
Agreed. But even in some instances, he is beholden to Parliament.
Yes. Particularly if he enters into a treaty or if he enters into another international agreement. And let me try to explain the difference between a treaty and an international agreement. Because see, in international law, the principle is very clear that all treaties are international agreements but not all international agreements are treaties. It means that a treaty is a term of art, and it means something specific for purposes of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. Now, according to Article 2 of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, a treaty is an international agreement concluded between states in writing, and governed by international law. So, when the president enters into a treaty, he has to bring the treaty to Parliament for ratification. The president can also enter into other international agreements which will not qualify as treaty. So, the president can, by oral agreement, enter into something with Buhari in Nigeria. That will be an international agreement, all right, but it will not be a treaty because it is not in writing.
Doesn't the Constitution talk about agreements and treaties?
Yes, because the Constitution is recognizing that in some cases, an agreement will not reach the level of a treaty.
But the Constitution requires the president to submit agreements,
yes,
foreign agreements, and treaties to Parliament.
Exactly.
What is the category of this arrangement with the United States of America?
Now you see, the Americans have an escape route in a situation like this. There's something they call in the USA executive agreements. Executive agreements, by American constitutional practice, do not have to go to Congress, the Senate, for ratification. They are called executive agreements. In this country, we are running the system of international regime on treaties that the Americans have. This is called dualism in international law. It means that the country's treaty-making power is split into different levels, 2 levels. The initial negotiations and signing is done by the executive branch, and the ratification is done by the legislative branch. So on this dualist approach, we are operating on the same arrangement with the Americans. The difference between us and the Americans is that the Americans have only one house of the Congress doing the ratification, which is the Senate. So the question you have posed is, what is the nature of the arrangement between the Republic of Ghana and the USA? Does it constitute an international agreement or a treaty which must be subjected to parliamentary ratification?
You are the expert. What do you think?
Yes. Have I seen any documents? I've not seen anything. But before you go there, ask yourself, do you think that all our interactions with other states are candidates for parliamentary ratifications?
I wouldn't know.
Exactly.
You should know.
To run the affairs of state, there are, it appears that already there are things which have been done between countries, between us and other countries, which will go in the category of executive agreements that the Americans have, which the president could have done on a lighter note without seeking parliamentary ratification. For example, if it was a typical exchange of prisoners treaty, remember recently one was negotiated between Ghana and the UK. That one, they have to bring it to Parliament for ratification. But maybe what we have in this particular instance is just some short-term brotherly arrangement. I mean, so maybe the presidency and the advisors there thought that, oh, Mr. President, this one, it can go. I believe that is what probably happened.
Well, we're going to go for another short break. And when we come back, I'd like to ask lawyer Kwame Gyan whether indeed he thinks that the public outcry is justifiable. The fear which is being expressed by many, many people, is it justifiable? Short break. Dealing with an issue which is burning, which is really hot. The decision of the government of Ghana to bring into the country 2 former detainees of the Guantanamo Bay Detention Center of the United States of America. And we're in conversation with lawyer Kwame Gyan of the Faculty of Law of the University of Ghana. Now, sir, do you think that the fear being expressed in different sections of the Ghanaian society is justifiable?
Kwesi, let me start by saying that I think that in my judgment, the president does not lack the power to commit us. I think he has the power within the constitutional dispensation to commit this republic. Because he is an executive president, and all of us have put our full faith and credit in him as our #1 representative. So on that level, I think that he has that authority. As to whether he should have brought on board Parliament and other stakeholders, I think that, if you ask me about that area, I will give you my views.
You can give your views now. No
my
problem.
views on that is that the people who are handling the president didn't do him justice in that area. If I was among the people advising His Excellency the President, a matter like this, I would have consulted Parliament, at least the leadership, the opposition leaders, the religious representation, traditional authorities, labor. I would have consulted these people and these identifiable stakeholders, sought their opinion. If the widespread opinion is no, I will tell America, I beg you, on this one. And because this is an election year, on this one, I beg you. And I think it would also have meant some consistency in our foreign policy. Because I believe from the late President Mills, I thought that our foreign policy was hinged on the principle of Diufiasem, which I think is another way of saying we are non-aligned. We are looking into our soup. But I am not one of the people who is advising the president, so what can I say? And I think I told you at the beginning, what we don't have too much or too many around His Excellency are very good messengers. You see, I think in politics, sometimes your messengers must be better and sweeter than your message. If you look at our traditional setting, the Ochami generally was the smartest guy in the palace. In fact, the Ochami is expected to be smarter than the chief, so that he can bring out the nitty-gritties and to point out to the chief what can go wrong. The Ochami was the microchip. He will process the information and determine what goes and what doesn't go. I think that the way it is in this country, there are people who are Achami, I don't know, but some of them or many of them are not up to scratch. So even where the president has a very good message, messengers botch the messages before they are delivered or botch the messages during delivery. Because this Guantanamo thing, as to whether they were arriving or not, started some 3 weeks ago. Good messengers should have intervened in a certain way. Now what they have done is, the last man is the president. You brought him to the slaughterhouse on Guantanamo. If he has not been able to impress the Ghanaian people, who can impress them? So where were the messengers? The frontline guys, where were they? He's the last man you want to speak on an issue. Because in my village they say, opening barrier. When the last man has spoken, the matter has ended. But this matter is even boiling. Because after the president spoke, they called the Catholic bishop man, the president of the Catholic Bishops' Conference. And he said, compassion must be co-joined with common sense. And I said, this man, he's my bishop. He's my bishop. He says, find a correlation between compassion and common sense. So, Kwesi, on this note, your question is the fear, the apprehension. Is it justifiable? Who says it is not? It is. In America, they have legislation which applies in the case of pedophiles. You know, pedophiles are persons who abuse, they sexually abuse minors. Law has been passed, federal legislation has been passed which require judges to notify the authorities in the areas where, or the police to notify residents in the area where a convicted pedophile is relocating into, that a pedophile is your neighbor, so that you know that there is a pedophile next door, so you take care of your daughters properly or your young children. So you have advance notice. Because see, is it not the case many years back under our traditional system? They used to beat the gong gong to tell us that some strange people are in the system. Be careful. Exactly. So why can't Ghanaians, why shouldn't they be scared? You are telling them Atitem Krona by area nu. So Atitem Krona, they are here. So they are justified in being apprehensive. But you could have prepared them for it properly. The president should have come to us and say, look, all of us are in this together. We want to show compassion to these two people. We want to show love and friendship to America. I wouldn't have described America as our allies. I don't think the USA, if they are asked to list their allies, will list Ghana as an ally. I don't think so.
So why did the president describe Ghana as an ally of the United States of America?
Oh, he was using ally probably in the loose sense of the word. Ally as friend.
Not as
Not ally as we use the word in international politics.
Okay.
Because I don't think, you know, I'm serious about this one. I don't think America, when they are sleeping and they wake up from their sleep, would say that we, Ghana, are their allies. Ally is a serious word. Maybe we are their friends, and they've been having compassion on us in our trials and tribulations.
By bringing us
No, by helping us when we need help.
Ex-enemy combatants.
No, the USA has done good for us. So,
true.
You know, I studied there on a US government scholarship.
Yes.
You know,
and then they brought us enemy combatants.
They also brought us some warships, you know, frigates. Occasionally they bring milk powder. They brought us the Millennium Challenge account.
Yeah, and all that justifies their bringing their enemy combatants to stay with us.
The Americans run their foreign policy in certain ways which we don't know. I was told by a professor friend of mine that some time back, the Americans would host diplomats in New York. The American rep at the UN, who hosts diplomats. And on a map of the world, he will show your country and tell you, you know, this is your country. And this is US assistance that is coming to your country. And this is how you vote for or against American interests in the General Assembly or the Security Interest or the Security Council. So to draw your attention that America will put its money where they get their support. So if you are voting permanently against them, they will withdraw their support to you.
Finally, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, Al-Nusra, and all of them, were they not created by the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States of America as instruments of foreign policy? And why are we being saddled with the problems that they have created?
Kwesi, they are pursuing their national interests. And what is in the country's national interest would not be static. The dynamics of the global politics, hegemonic politics, economic politics, all of it at any particular point in time converge to determine what is in a nation's national interest or national security interest. So at a certain point in history, it was appropriate to create these kinds of irregulars to push American foreign policy interests. At a certain point, their existence becomes a kind of you don't want to have their existence coexist with American policy interests. So America has to disband them at that point. So what I am trying to say is, what is in their national interest may not necessarily be what is in our national interest. Maybe what we have done is we have not properly considered what they have done.
Yes, sir.
Kwesi?
Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure.
For coming. Thank you very much.
I thought you were going to turn it into politics, but as usual, you did great.
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you for the compliment.
It's always a privilege to interact with you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you for the compliment.
We hope that it will solve some of the issues in town as to
I do hope so,
what is
too.
going on.
But viewers, we've been listening to Dr. Kwame Gyan. We've been listening to him. He's a member of the Faculty of Law of the University of Ghana. He teaches at LESIA, the Foreign Policy Institute at the University of Ghana, and has a very strong academic relationship with Ghana's armed forces training institutions, and we are happy that he came. From the discussion, from the conversation, I think it's clear that some of the issues are very, very thorny. But you can always rely on TV3 to bring you the best in everything.